The Nuremberg trials were a series of trials held in Nuremberg, Germany, where numerous high-ranking Nazi officials were on trial for their actions during World War II and the Holocaust. The trials began on November 20th, 1945, and ended about a year later in October of 1946. They served to bring those responsible for the Third Reich's heinous actions to justice. Judges and chief prosecutors from Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union presided over the Nuremberg trials. Robert H. Jackson, the chief prosecutor of the United States, said, "What shall we do with the many men whom there is probable cause to accuse of atrocities and other crimes? Determine the innocence or guilt of the accused after a hearing as dispassionate as the times and horrors we deal with will permit, leaving our reasons and motives clear." He said this about the Nuremberg trials and how they judged the Nazi officials. The crimes that led to the prosecution of the Nazi officials included conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit war crimes. The accused Nazi officials were carefully selected to represent several important departments of the German Nazi regime. During the trials, 21 Nazi Germans were convicted of war crimes during World War II. Of the 21 convicted Nazis, 3 people were acquitted of their crimes, 11 were sentenced to death, and 7 were sentenced to time in prison.
Hermann Goering, Hitler's second-in-command, president of the Reichstag, and the commander of the Luftwaffe, was indicted on charges of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, directing wars of aggression, and conspiring with Hitler to execute criminal actions. Rudolf Hess, the deputy leader of the Nazi Party, was accused of crimes against peace and conspiracy to commit crimes. Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop. Wilhelm Keidel, head of the Third Reich's armed forces. Alfred Jodl, commander of the armed forces. And the Third Reich's minister of the occupied Eastern Territories, Alfred Rosenberg. Minister of the Interior, Wilhelm Frick. Walther Funk, the Nazi Minister of Economics. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the man in charge of Germany's security force. The Governor-General of occupied Poland during World War II, nicknamed the Jew Butcher of Krakow, Hans Frank. Konstantin von Neurath, the Governor of Bohemia and Moravia. Defendant Erich Raeder, the leader of the German Navy. Raeder's successor, Karl Donitz. The leader of the Hitler Youth, Baldur von Schirach. Julius Streicher, a radical anti-Semitic Nazi publisher. Fritz Sauckel, who was in charge of the allocation of the forced laborers and directed the relocation, care, treatment, and deportation of millions of enslaved people. Albert Speer, the Third Reich's Minister of Armaments responsible for the success of the German war machine. Hitler's adjutant, who was tried in absentia, Martin Bormann. The Commissioner for Occupied Netherlands, Arthur Seyss-Inquart. Hjalmar Scott, a former economics minister. Hans Fritzsche, head of the press and radio department. And Franz von Papen, a German politician who played an instrumental role to Hitler's appointment as chancellor, were charged and brought to trial at Nuremberg, but were fully acquitted and found not guilty. The Nuremberg trials occurred because of the Allies' need for a display of dominance over the Germans, the necessity to provide a catharsis for the Jewish, and for justice to be served for the victims of the Holocaust while simultaneously following the basic principles of law. They are the compromise to the conflict of interest between vengeance and justice.
As a result of the trials being international and the prevalence of the Allies' influence over the trials' proceedings, each Allied country had its own portion of the trials to themselves. The Allied prosecution didn't necessarily have pure intentions of serving justice during their trials with the Nazi defendants. Some Allied nations attempted to blame the Nazis for some of their war crimes they committed. The Allied prosecution possessed numerous kinds of evidence. They used survivors of concentration camps as witnesses, Nazi officials' testimonies against other Nazis, German government documents that implicated the accused, and recorded footage from when Allied forces liberated concentration camps to showcase their brutal conditions and horrors. The United States, Britain, Soviet Union, and France all tried and prosecuted the accused Nazi officials before the panel consisting of Allied judges came to a decision on the defendants' sentencing. The judges announced their verdicts on October 1st, 1946. Göring, the man who once claimed, "I have no conscience, Hitler is my conscience," received a death sentence by hanging, but committed suicide using a cyanide pill because the Allies denied his request of an honorable death by being shot. Von Ribbentrop, Keitel, Frick, Kaltenbrunner, Frank, Jodl, Rosenberg, Streicher, Saukel, and Sayce and Quart were all sentenced to death and hanged. Funk, Hess, Ryder, Speer, von Neurath, Donitz, and von Schreichrach all received sentences of imprisonment. The Nazi officials who received prison sentences were jailed at the Spandau prison in Berlin. Schatt, von Papen, and Frisch were found not guilty and acquitted. Bormann was given a death sentence by hanging, but was absent at the execution of the death sentences. The Allies executed the death sentences on October 16, 1946. They hung and cremated the bodies before putting the ashes of the Nazi officials in the Isar River. The legacy of the Nuremberg trials continues to thrive and flourish. The Nuremberg trials set the precedent for proceedings of the international trials. They proved that the victors write the history books. They endorsed the rule of law through justice's turbid prevalence through the demonstration of war crimes not going unpunished. The Nuremberg trials showed that no one is above the law. War criminals receive their retribution at the trials. This display between justice and conscience becomes prominent through the trial's emphasis on the importance of law and rule of law.